You know the scene, right? You're in a meeting, maybe at a dinner party, and there's always that one person, the loudest, most confident voice in the room. And we all kind of just assume they must be the smartest. But what if I told you psychology suggests the exact opposite is often true? Let's take a look at the architecture of a rigid mind.
It turns out there's a fascinating cognitive bias that explains this whole thing perfectly. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's the key to understanding why some of the most certain voices are, well, also the most mistaken.
And this reveals something really important. See, low performance isn't just a gap in what someone knows. It's actually a structural problem in how they think. That absolute, rock-solid certainty, it's not a sign of intelligence. It's a symptom of some deep cognitive rigidity.
So, here's what we're going to do in this explainer. First, we'll unpack that illusion of superiority. Then we're going to get into the diagnosis, the 6 specific habits of a cognitively rigid mind. And finally, don't worry, we'll map out a path to becoming more mentally flexible.
All right, let's start at the very beginning of the problem. When a person is literally unable to see the limits of their own competence, it creates the perfect breeding ground for a rigid mindset to take hold and grow.
And this is the pivot point for our whole discussion. We have to stop thinking about intelligence as just a collection of facts and figures. Instead, we're going to diagnose the underlying thought processes, the mental habits that can actually trap a person in a low-performing state.
Okay, so think of this as a kind of clinical examination of the mind. We're about to break down 6 specific, observable habits that are basically giant red flags, signals that a mind is trapped, underperforming, and really resistant to any kind of growth. Let's dive into the first one.
Habit number 1 is absolutism, or what you and I would just call black and white thinking. This is a total inability to process nuance. For a mind like this, everything has to be sorted into one of 2 simple buckets. It's either good or it's bad, right or wrong. There is absolutely no room for any gray area.
And you can see why, right? A rigid mind craves that simplicity because dealing with complexity takes a lot of mental energy. It's just easier to think in terms of good versus bad. But a flexible, high-performing mind, it embraces the fact that reality is almost always messy, complex, and full of uncertainty.
So habit number 2 is something called aggressive confirmation bias. Look, we all have our biases. We all like to hear things that confirm what we already believe, but this is on another level. This is an active rejection of any information that challenges a core belief. It goes way beyond stubbornness. Psychologists actually see it as a failure of neuroplasticity, which is just a fancy way of saying the brain has lost its ability to adapt and learn new things.
Just let that quote sink in for a second. When you refuse to update your opinion, even when you see new, credible evidence, you are literally choosing the comfort of being right over the uncomfortable but necessary process of getting closer to the truth. You're signaling that in that area, your brain has stopped growing.
Habit number 3 is a fun one. It's called logical leapfrogging. This is that classic mistake of confusing correlation with causation. You've probably heard this example. In the summer, ice cream sales go up, and so do shark attacks. A rigid mind might leap to the conclusion that ice cream causes shark attacks, but the flexible mind steps back and looks for the hidden factor. In this case, it's just the hot weather that's causing both.
Which leads us straight into our 4th habit, a total lack of what's called metacognition. Now, metacognition sounds complicated, but it's really simple. It just means thinking about your thinking. It's the superpower of being able to step outside your own head and look at your thought processes objectively.
See, a mind that never, ever asks itself this one simple question, could I be wrong here, is a mind that's missing that critical self-reflection loop. It starts to mistake its own subjective feelings and interpretations for objective, undeniable reality.
So what do you think happens when you challenge a mind that's convinced it already possesses the objective truth? Well, it gets hostile. To a rigid mind, a simple, genuine request for evidence, a question as simple as, hey, why do you believe that, feels like a full-blown personal attack.
And the contrast here is just so clear. When you question a high-performing mind, the first response is almost always curiosity. It's an opportunity to sharpen their own thinking. But for the low-performing, rigid mind, the gut reaction is anger. That hostility is just a defense mechanism, a shield thrown up to protect a weak argument that has gotten all tangled up with their ego.
And our final habit, number 6, is all about the environment you build for yourself. Let me put it this way. If every single person in your social circle thinks exactly like you, votes like you, and agrees with you on every important issue,
You haven't discovered some universal truth. You've just built a very comfortable cage for your mind.
And that's where the antidote comes in. Instead of a comfortable echo chamber, high performers go looking for what's called intellectual friction. They actively seek out smart people who disagree with them. Why? Because they know that's the only way ideas get tested, sharpened, and ultimately made better. It's like a workout for your brain.
Okay, after going through that whole diagnosis, you might be feeling a little worried. I get it. But here's the most important part, the hopeful part. This diagnosis is not a life sentence. These are just habits. And habits, as we all know, can be changed.
The best news from neuroscience is that our brains are incredibly plastic. That just means they can change. We can actively train ourselves to be more open-minded, more curious, and a little less certain about everything. You can literally rewire your own brain to be more flexible.
So, at the end of the day, we need to completely reframe what we think of as intelligence. It's not about having a library of facts stored in your head. True intelligence is a dynamic process. It's all about your willingness to adapt, to update your beliefs, and to keep on growing. So let's make this super practical. Here's a simple 3-step prescription. Number 1, actively practice being more curious. Number 2, get comfortable with uncertainty. It's okay to say, I don't know. And number 3, go find that intellectual friction. Deliberately find people who challenge your thinking in a productive, respectful way.
And that leaves us with one final, big question for you to think about. As you go about your life this week, where do you see these patterns of cognitive rigidity showing up? Is it in your coworkers, your family, the people you see online? Or, and this is the hard part, if you're being truly honest, do you recognize any of these habits in yourself?